Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion as advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. Today, I am joined by Laura Dunn. Welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement podcast. I'm so excited to sit down and talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So, you're running for Congress, first of all, and we'll dive into that here in just a little bit. You're running in New York District 12, which has quite a few candidates. So we'll kind of dive in and talk about a little bit about your history, but I would love for you to just introduce yourself, give a overview and a background of who you are as this incredible human being that has done some very impactful work with survivors. So I'm excited to sit down and just listen to you talk.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the space. Like you said, the race is pretty full. It's pretty full of white men in particular, cisgender, heterosexual white men especially. And a lot of the women have not been featured. And I've been very public about being a survivor of campus sexual violence. And that is part of why I'm running right now. I know what it's like to be victimized. I know what it's like to have an institution fail you, if not multiple institutions. In my case, I was raped on a college campus by two men on my crew team, and the police did not handle it appropriately. The campus did not handle it appropriately. Even my sports team didn't handle it appropriately. And so I ended up losing my opportunity to be a Division I college athlete after less than a year in college. And I had to do that for my safety and my sanity. And I was stuck on that campus and terrified certain days. So I know what it takes to survive, and I have come out the other side. I've become a civil and victims' rights attorney and the leading Title IX attorney in the United States on the issue of campus sexual assault. So I have turned all my pain into my power. I go into court every single day, hold perpetrators and enablers, those institutions that look the other way, accountable. And I want to do that in Washington, D.C. for the people, especially in the day and age of the Epstein files.
Speaking of which, we're receiving these files and we're seeing them like heavily redacted. And I sat down and talked to one of the lawyers who represents 11 of the Epstein survivors. One of the questions that I asked him, and this is going to be, kind of diving in and just, let's just go full force into this, right? One of the questions that I had for you is thinking about, from your background and from your education and your training and your experience, looking at these files and you see survivor names on or you see them not redacted, but you see the wealthy and the powerful and the enablers and the accomplices of Jeffrey Epstein. You see their names are completely redacted. However, this most recent batch, it had like 100 and something survivors that had their names literally, there. So thinking about that from your experience and your background, what are your thoughts on this and how the Department of Justice, when I say justice with, obviously parenthesis or yeah, I say that, but it's more of like injustice because what's happening to these survivors is they're being silenced and they're being
Mm.
tormented online. Looking at their comments, we follow some of them, we collaborate with quite a few of them, and we've interviewed two of the Epstein survivors themselves. But looking at their comments and looking at people just how they are towards them. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this specifically.
Yeah, well, I'm going to steal that line from you, the Department of Injustice. So you're going to hear me say that on the campaign trail, and it's going to be attributed to you. So thank you for that phrase, because you're right. Everything is upside down, and heads will roll if I make it into Congress. I am not going to allow the tolerance for first, not being on top of the judicial order to release these files. Second, not doing what the order said, which was both protect the victims, but don't protect the accused.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two different things happening. If I was running the Department of Justice, it would have been very simple. They would be units assigned by victim name, and they just look for that name and information related to that person and only redact that and nothing else. Um, the perpetrators, why are they and or accused, right? We haven't had full hearings and processing of all the information. Why are they being redacted? We know why. It's corruption, right? Like that's the
Hmm.
only reason why. People have asked me, what's the answer? Is it why isn't there indictments? Apathy, corruption. We
Hmm.
know that someone listed in the Epstein files way more than almost everyone else, Donald Trump, is our president. He doesn't have an interest in full disclosure. He doesn't have an interest in justice or transparency. Pam Bondi is just a puppet for him, promoting what he wants to have happen. So I'm upset that the judge has not held Pam Bondi in contempt. If I was a judge overseeing this case, it would be done already. There would be Pam Bondi in jail. We'd go whoever's next in line. You have to meet this deadline. You didn't meet it. You're in jail next. Like who's until we get all the way down. And
Hmm.
the sad reality is when sanity is restored, hopefully that blue wave comes in November, we're going to have to redo everything. We're going to have to look it all over, make sure the right things were redacted. The things that shouldn't have been redacted are disclosed. And you know what you can't get back is the victim privacy. That is so unacceptable. I
Hmm.
posted about this yesterday on TikTok. I have quite literally been in court in Virginia, been told at like 4 p.m. and less than at 8 a.m. tomorrow, you will have on my desk 1,000+ documents fully redacted to protect your client's privacy. I've worked through the night. I've done it 100% accurately, and I've met court deadlines. Attorneys do this every single day. So the fact that this wasn't done, I don't think it's accidental. I do think it's about retribution. It's about fear. It's about intimidation, because
Hmm.
that's already been the issue with a lot of the
Hmm.
survivors that have been named in the Epstein files. So I'm really horrified. As a fellow survivor, my heart goes out to each and every person in that file. You're not just a name, you're a person, you're an experience, you are someone holding pain that the world is now having to witness, and that is re-traumatizing. And it was already courageous for them to ask for the release. The least we could have done as a federal government was protect them.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And first of all, thank you for that. It's very eye-opening to hear from attorney perspective, thinking about these redactions. And like you said, you do this every single day. And one thing that obviously we need to point out directly here is Pam Bondi served as Attorney General of Florida during 2011 through 2019, which, obviously Jeffrey Epstein was still very active, right?
Hmm.
And it's concerning. She knew this was happening and swept it completely under the rug, right? But here's the thing, we know how these systems treat survivors, right? And it always uplifts those in power and the powerful men. You said it yourself earlier whenever we're talking about the New York 12, candidacy and the candidates that are running, they're mainly cisgender white men. You're correct. And that's not diversity. That's not showing how diverse that district actually is and how diverse New York is and how diverse Congress is, right? And we still have a lot of these wealthy white men that are literally running the country. And a lot of them are named in the Epstein files. But, um, but, kind of
Yes.
thinking about more about your work and like tackling these systems, to enact the change through legislation, like VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act, and then also expanding like Title IX to include sexual assault survivors on college campuses. Can you walk us through a little bit about your journey and working in these policy spaces?
Yeah, so I did not intend to get involved in politics. I really was
Mm-hmm.
just an everyday person that kind of hated politics, if anything else, because I came from a politically divided family and it just seemed like a lot of stress. And then I had that experience on my college campus, and I realized the systems are not set up to actually do what we think that they're supposed to do. So survivors aren't met with the best person to take their report by law enforcement. We make people go to frontline officers, normally patrol officers, who are the least qualified, the most brand new, and normally are there a long time if they're not qualified to move up. So we give the worst person to do a first interview, and only then, if that person properly catalogs it, does it go up to a trained detective who may or may not have trauma specific training. And then the prosecutor looks at it and is looking at it to get rid of it. What can I move off my plate? Not how can I make sure I get justice for this? So our systems are broken. They've been broken for a long time. In fact, I'll give a nod to President Obama. In 2015, as he was leaving the White House, he issued a DOJ report on gender bias in policing and prosecution. And if anyone was going to have a third term, it should have been him. It should not be the threats of Donald Trump, but he respects our democracy too much. But he set out a mission that I would love to pick up and run with. I do want to remove gender bias in law enforcement and policing. And it's not just gender bias. We know it's also racial bias. We know it's bias against the LGBTQ community, bias against people with disabilities. I mean, there needs to be a civil rights overhaul of our criminal system because it's not a criminal justice system. It hasn't been for a long time. So I've been working on this issue. I worked first in Wisconsin. I got alcohol listed as an intoxicating substance for sexual assaults. And that seems like a no-brainer. But for some reason, the alcohol lobby opposed that being in criminal statutes. So there was no such thing as being too drunk to consent. And that was my experience. I was not completely unconscious, but I was quite inebriated, and I was taken advantage of in that situation by two men who worked together to harm me. And so my case wasn't prosecuted, but my story was used to help change that law to show the horror that we were allowing by political failures of getting legislation passed. And then I took that story up to the national level. The Center for Public Integrity worked with National Public Radio, who has since been defunded by Trump, and promoted my story and story of several other survivors. And at that time, I was the only survivor going by my full name and using my face. Other survivors used a lot of privacy, and that was normative. We now see a lot of survivors naming themselves and being public, but that was not common. Everyone was Jane Doe and backlit and voice changed. We have rejected the shame that needs to keep happening because that's the only way you create accountability. So we used my story to put forward what became Section 304 of the Violence Against Women Act. So it did a lot of things, but very briefly, it requires consent education for all incoming freshmen in college campuses all across the country. It trains on the definitions of gender violence. It requires bystander intervention. So it's lovely for preventing harms and educating people about what to do if they occur. But the part that I love the most is it gave victims and accused both the right to have attorneys in proceedings and a lot of procedural protections. So hearings that used to be about sweeping gender violence under the rug and not doing anything about it and silencing the survivor now became opportunities for justice. And I started a national nonprofit that had an over 80% success rate of removing perpetrators from campus for all the survivors who are brave enough to use us. So changed federal law, worked on the policies and the procedures related to that, the 2011 Dear Colleague letter, the 2014 frequently asked questions on sexual violence guidance. Those have all been stripped by the Trump administration. He's been stripping Title IX for quite some time. In fact, he changed the regulations when he came into the office to protect the accused and no longer protect the victimized in a sufficient way. If anything, created barriers to basic things like reports being taken seriously. But we've made a lot of progress. We've also lost a lot of progress, and we need to not only recover what we've lost, but move forward. Title IX doesn't have a uniform statute of limitations. So that means depending on where you live, you may have more or less time to bring your claims against a K through 12 or a college institution after violating your rights. We also still have child marriage, differential consent ages in this country. It's like the dark ages. We'd like to say America's great. I'm not seeing the greatness. All I'm seeing is a lot of people who want to keep perpetrators empowered. In fact, the number one argument for preventing K through 12 education on consent is the idea that like all of a sudden sex will be happening. And the reality is when you don't educate, you're just leaving people vulnerable to perpetration. So I want to get in office. I want to clean house. I want to bump out a lot of these older politicians who've been there way too long and have their archaic ideas about what is and is not sexual violence, move them out and bring in more leaders like myself who will not tolerate abuse and who will stand against injustice and push consent because we can live in a world where we communicate about what we want and don't want, and violence can end.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about like oppression, as a LGBTQ person myself and as an LGBTQ survivor myself, and my partner is transgender, thinking about that, you know, and also coming from like your background, with yourself being a part of the LGBTQ plus community of yourself, thinking about oppression and thinking about violence towards like Black trans women.
Mm,
Oftentimes we do not see Black trans women while they're alive. We see their memorials. And
mm,
it is such a very real statistic that they're at a very higher risk of being a victim, being trafficked, being being murdered just for simply existing. Thinking about that, there was a story that really struck me.
hmm
Last year, Sam Nordquist from Minnesota went to New York and he was murdered senselessly. This case specifically has fucked me up ever since the first time I heard it. I grew up on true crime. I've seen a lot of stories. I'm a big horror like fanatic. Like I absolutely love horror films, and like true crime. I grew up on it. But whenever, you know, growing up during a time of war, I was born in 96. So I was in getting ready to go to kindergarten during 9/11, right? And seeing these school shootings happen, going through, looking at school shootings, hearing about them every single day. The worst thing that I ever did was create a social media page. And the
mm.
reason I say that, I actually, well, actually, I can't say that it's the worst thing, but looking back, it's like, would I have known everything that was going on? Would I have met the people that I've met? Would I have created this movement during the 2024 election, to give that voice and be the
hmm
voice for those who don't have it, right? And we've created this platform to elevate the voices because we know that corporate and mainstream media is complicit in silence, and the only time that they cover like these stories is whenever it's relevant, right? And we've seen that. We have these platforms and these independent based platforms that give these unfiltered conversations like what you and I are having right now, because this is that people to people education. And this
Mm.
is people are turning to podcasts for information.
They want
They're turning to
truth. They
independent,
want
they want
truth.
the truth. And they don't want that watered down, whitewashed bullshit. They want to actually know straight up what is going on and what it looks like. And but thinking about like oppression and thinking about um like violence towards LGBTQ community members,
Yeah.
and also kind of like tying this into what's happening right now with ICE, targeting Latino, Black and Brown communities, Somali communities in Minnesota. I used to live in Minneapolis.
Mm.
I know the exact
Mm.
location where George Floyd was murdered. I know the exact location of where Renee Good was murdered. I know the exact location, and I used to frequent that Glam Doll Donuts that we all saw in the Alex Preddy video.
Yeah.
I used to frequent that donut shop. I know
Mm.
exactly where it is. I stood in that exact spot where he was murdered. I used to live around the corner from where Renee Good was murdered.
Yeah.
And I cannot help but think that can literally be any single one of us at any moment in time. They are
Mm.
not going after quote unquote illegal people because, in my honest to God opinion, no human being is illegal on stolen land. That comes from my grandmother, who was Native American, that grew up in Wichita, Kansas. She became a huge feminist, was an advocate for women, and taught me to understand the true roots of where this country was. She said, um, she passed away in 2014. So I'm thinking about, Trump being elected in 2016, she would have been completely fucking pissed. But I'm thinking about that now because my grandfather was. But just thinking about what's happening right now, I would love to get your thoughts on like abolishing ICE because obviously I want to I want to believe that there's reform, right? Just like with the
Yeah.
criminal justice system, I know that it is possible. We have to get the right people, but I can't see a reform in this current state. I cannot see it happening. Um,
Hmm.
so I would love to see, obviously, the abolishment of ICE, and obviously, it needs to go further than that because I also believe in prosecution. Um, these, the right to due process as guaranteed by, I believe, the Fifth and 14th Amendment.
Hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
No,
I always
you're
get it
right. You got
twisted.
that right. Good job.
But and I'm not even a lawyer. Guaranteed the right to due process. But without the right to due process, it's literally government sanctioned kidnapping. Like
Yeah.
literally, it's right there. It's borderline, and you're not even borderline. You're looking at these reports from CCOT, the El Salvadorian torture prison,
Yeah.
literally destroyed me as a
Mm.
sexual assault survivor myself.
Yeah.
I cannot even fathom. I cannot even imagine what these men went through. I
Yeah.
cannot even imagine.
Yeah. Well, if I can, I want to first thank you for saying their names. You said Sam's name, George's name, Renee's name, Alex's name, and we need to keep
Mm-hmm.
saying their names. And I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
emotional because you're right. These are all of us. This is anyone. And we know that sexual violence is happening in that El Salvadorian prison. We know sexual violence is happening in these ICE detention centers. You can see I like can't even keep myself composed because I feel it. I feel that
Mm-hmm.
urgency, and that's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
running. Politics is horrible. It's
Mm-hmm.
about money. It's not about leadership. It's about connections. It's not about thought leadership. It's a game. It's horrible, but I'm playing
Mm-hmm.
it because someone with integrity needs to play this game and actually win for once. And to your point about like how do we change this? If we can't change it with the blue wave coming into Congress, if we fall short and we don't flip the Senate, but we flip the House, we have a lot of power. We can hold things up. But really, I would encourage and if not lead every single American citizen to withhold all their taxes and say, we will not fund a government that does not stand for our Constitution. We will not give money for those ICE salaries because it's coming from somewhere and it's coming from us. So if Congress will fail us, if they will not step up because they've been corrupt and cowardly this entire time, they have not shown the backbone we deserve, then we have the opportunity first to vote and see if we can win it back. And if we don't, we still have power. The people have always had more power than we know. And you spoke about
Mm-hmm.
so many topics like LGBTQ oppression. I mean, the horror of all of this, right, is there are people who vote on ignorant issues like drag queens reading for story time and trans athletes competing. It's like, so you're going to trade your civil rights and liberties and put in a dictator because you're uncomfortable seeing someone who may have been born as a man put on a dress and do dress up just like children do quite literally every day. They get to have make believe and play and fun. And oh no, heaven forbid an adult do that too and be whoever it is that they want to be today. It's horrifying. So I want to usher in a new era of civil rights. There's things we can do that were left from the first era, right? We have qualified immunity that protects law enforcement when they kill people wrongfully. Black Lives Matter was the movement that could have protected us against what happened with ICE, right? We could have set standards and we failed. And now we shouldn't be surprised. ICE absolutely can be abolished. I think it will. But there's even simpler common sense things like Customs and Border Patrol. They have a 100-mile radius from the border. That's why they're in all these locations. Let's make it 10 miles. keep them actually at the border. How revolutionary, and keep them out of our cities because we have local law enforcement to do those jobs that are more directly accountable to the people than federal law enforcement is. But we need to think beyond that. There's a second Bill of Rights. Those rights are to education, to healthcare, to protect the environment, to housing. These ideas have existed a long time. We just need the younger generation to say, even if I don't have the same income as my parents, even if I haven't been able to buy a house, even if I am scared that I don't have money to retire, I have to go all in. I have to run for office. I have to become the better community leader that we need. I have to do something to get off the sidelines and not just tweet my anger, but actually get the hands on that arc of the moral universe and start bending it because we can do it. I would not be running if I didn't believe, and I am running afraid because I truly think if I don't do this now, I don't know who's coming and if we'll even have the opportunity to do it later.
Mhm, mhm. Whew. What you just said absolutely like kind of sticks out to me like very deeply because well, like my grandmother said, she said if we don't do it, who the hell's going to? And she's like, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know if we're still going to be alive. We don't know. And I think it's the unknown is what really gets me every single time I think about it because we thought that, 2016 was a warning shot. Okay. 2024 is a warning shot. We're not going to get another warning shot. This is it. And we're not
Hmm.
in this full blown like fascist state just yet, but Project 2025 literally terrified the hell out of me whenever I read it. And seeing people online downplay it, like, oh, you're just being this and you're just doing that, and it's not real. And then you start seeing it, then they start seeing it being implemented. He takes office in January and they start seeing it being implemented. And they're like, oh, maybe you were right. It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
we understood. We understood what was going to happen. And did we know that was going to be necessarily to this extent? Um, well, not with ice specifically, but I think everything else. But you know, what do you expect, right? Um,
Well, you're making me think of a line from Asada Shakur, the Black Panther, and she says, "The less you think about your oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows." We've been sitting in a pot of water, and the temperature is just cranking up. And every now and again, we get a little alarmed because it was cranked a little too fast, and we're like, "Oh, it's hot." But it's been getting hot. It's been getting hot for a while. We literally can't remember a horror from a month ago. And
mhm.
shock and awe is the approach, but we all must stay grounded in the power that we have individually and in community. We cannot turn out, turn away, tune out, whatever you want to call it. We have to be ready and we can't just wait for the voting. Minneapolis showed us what being ready really looks like. It's getting out in the streets, it's making those networks. It's the guy with the print shop just stamping abolish ICE on t-shirts, small to big. Everything matters. The artists are just as powerful as the lawyers in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's at the same level of that organization aspect that needs to happen. And I'm seeing a lot of conversation around general striking and around like general strike and doing the boycotts. They're working very, very heavily and they're doing a phenomenal job at it. And we're starting to see corporations be held accountable, but obviously it needs to go a lot further. And I mean, I haven't had an Amazon account in like years, and I don't plan on it. They're complicit. But thinking about New York, okay,
Hmm.
um, I was really excited to see Zoran. I was
Yes,
really excited.
me too.
Um, I he is he's like me. Historically, I'm a socialist. I'm a card carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and just doing a lot of different work like that. But I'm willing to work with anybody and everybody because there is obviously common ground in the gender justice and abolishing ICE is something that I can talk to anybody on. This should not be partisan issues.
Hmm.
These are human rights issues, right? These are something that's going to impact generations to come, and generations are going to future generations are going to look back and they're going to laugh at us, and they're like, y'all, what the
I
fuck?
wish they would be laughing. I think they're going to be horrified of
I
how on
think
earth did you let this happen?
I think it'll be kind of like a laugh, but it'll be kind of like one of those like side chuckles. You know what I mean? Kind of
A
like
dark
y'all
humor. Yeah.
like you had the. I have a really dark sense of humor. I think that's part of the reason why I said they'll be laughing, but because I laugh about my own trauma, so I that's just how I cope. But to other people, it kind of seems like, oh, are you really that condescending about it? And it's like, at least I'm talking about myself. But but anyway, thinking about New York, and there was a bill that was introduced, and I know there's some things that have been going on around this for like many years, but the involuntary intoxication loophole,
Mm.
and I attended a coalition, and my friend Will Rivera just won his election as town supervisor. And I'm gonna butcher this name of this town, and I butcher it every single time. Anianta, I think is how you say it. I think it's an
Oh.
upstate. Um, but he just won town supervisor. But he works with a lot of like image-based survivors, like deep fakes, etc. Which
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to
Mm-hmm.
get your opinion on that here in just a moment. But that involuntary intoxication loophole, or I think it's no, I think it's either involuntary or involuntary, but it's still a loophole that still exists in the state of New York. And this is something that I would love for you to touch on and kind of talk about. A
Yeah.
lot of these loopholes still exist, even in 2026.
Oh, I think if you did a survey of state law and sexual assault across the US, you would see many holes in many
Yes,
states over
yes.
very, very obvious things. I mean, like, can someone consent if they're asleep? The obvious answer is no, but you'd be surprised how many cases I've read about, like, oh, if they woke up and they're already being assaulted, what is the standard? It's like, why are we having such dumb conversations? I know it's because men wrote these laws a long time ago, heterosexual men that were being able to take advantage of women because of the laws that they wrote. And I'm just saying that bluntly because if you know the history of rape law, you know that
Hmm.
nothing was ever prohibited. They never once prohibited anything. The standard was, did the victim resist? So it wasn't don't hit, don't choke, don't corner, don't threaten. It was, well, when you did all those violent things, did the victim hold out throughout the entire duration of the rape? Because if they gave up in the middle, if they froze, which we know is biology, or if they were scared and thought this was the only way they're going to live, so they complied, that used to not be rape by the definition of our laws. So
Hmm.
when I say that men wrote these laws to advantage them, I'm not even remotely joking. That is 100% true. They said, give us no limits on sexual access to women, and because of course rape used to only be towards women by definition, and other types of sexual acts were not considered or even cataloged under the law. So we've gone from that to what we have now, where a lot of states are at least trying to have consent. I actually, this is going to sound a little nutty, but stick with me. I think consent isn't the best standard because it's still interpreted as resistance. How do we know if someone didn't consent? Well, because they said no and they punched the person and they tried to run away. It's still putting the victim on trial. So I want to do what we should have done from square one, which would be like, hey, if you want to have sexual activity with someone, you can't do it by force. You can't do it by threat. You can't do it by coercion. You can't do it by holding up their job. You can't do it by saying, this is what you need to do if you want to see your child who's in ICE detention, right? Like, we actually need to prohibit the actions of the perpetrators. And that's what the law is supposed to do. There's this famous saying in law school, the law tells the bad man what not to do. Well, we skipped that for sexual assault. So to your point about New York state law, yes, we haven't closed all the loopholes. We still allow abuse of people who are intoxicated. We still actually have like disagreements about how like, is it enough intoxication that they're quote unquote helpless? There's like, you basically have to be unconscious, which is a dumb interpretation because you would use the word unconscious if that's what it meant, but they used helpless. But then all these courts, which again, mostly white, cisgender, heterosexual men, are saying, well, helpless has to be completely unable to move. It's like, no, there's other, why are we letting perpetration happen? So I've actually sat in the American Law Institute, the ALI. It is the premier legal organization in America, and they develop what's called model penal codes. So they do that for sexual assault. When I was in law school, the 1965 model penal code was being taught to me in 2014, right? Like it's very old. They tried to update it. I was lucky enough to be a liaison on it. I heard the most offensive and idiotic things in that room from quote unquote intelligent, top of the line professors. Things like, well, I start having sex with my partner before they wake up and they don't seem to mind. So why are we prohibiting it in the law? And I saw like reporters, the people in charge of these groups being like, we are not basing the law off your sex life. This is about stopping people from breaking in homes and having activity with people who are unconscious, which we call rape. Like, in the ALI let anyone be on that committee. They didn't have to have a background in this topic. They just had to be a lawyer and think that they were smart. And a lot of men volunteered, and a lot of men put their personal sex lives in and what kind of access they would like to have in their personal lives as the standard. That project is done. So it was not successful. And at some point, one of the reporters bluntly said, this is more regressive than the 1965 version we had. So we are losing the battle, and it's because the wrong people have power and the right people aren't in the rooms. And we need to keep shifting that in society. We're about to see the baby boomer generation pass away. We are about to have millennials finally have a few decades, not that many, where we can do something. And we have all these younger generations that have been so disenfranchised and disillusioned. So as a millennial, I feel like it's our responsibility to put the ship back together and to do what our previous generation refused to do, which is get out of office after you've served your term. I want 12-year congressional term limits, and I want to prohibit Congress from stock trading and making themselves wealthy and holding power and position. We need to live our values, and our laws need to reflect that. So I kind of went way off topic about the laws, but the laws are bad because the people in the room are the wrong people. And we have a choice as we move forward in society and all these generational shifts happen. We have the choice of who we invite in the room, and we have to do better.
Always room for improvement, and no matter how much progress obviously we continue to make, there's always room for improvement, and there's always room to go even further than what we already did, right? And I think that's a crucial moment in the movement, you know. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say thank you for, being candid and having this conversation with me, because these are not the easiest conversations to have. I mean, we're talking about some very deep things that impact like millions of people and have been around, the generational trauma that people have grown up around, growing up in poverty, growing up around violence, domestic violence, my own, I have a disabled mother that is going
Mhm.
through cervical cancer right now. I grew
Mhm.
up with an
So
alcoholic
sorry.
and abusive stepfather. And thinking about that, and I honestly think if I wouldn't have went through what I did, would I give a damn about anything that's happening right now? Would I
Mm,
be just one of those quote unquote normies that don't pay attention to anything? I think about, what if I never would have went public with my story? Would my life have been
yeah.
different? Would it have been easier? What if I never would have came out as bisexual and then eventually as gay? What if I never, met my partner back in 2018? Would I still be an alcoholic? Would I still be a drug addict? Would I still would I even be alive? These are like those
Mm,
very real questions, because I've attempted suicide, by overdose, and I what would I be doing right now? Would I have created this movement and met or three incredible people while doing
mhm.
this movement? Would we have 300,000 followers on social media? Like it's just, if I never would have created social media, what would have happened all those years ago? I've had my same Facebook since 2011, right? And I've met thousands and thousands of people, traveled the country. I've served on
Mm.
committees and councils, and I've been to the White House. I've been to Congress. I've been to, all these different things, and I've met so many incredible human beings. But I can't help but think, what if I never would have made that Facebook post introducing myself to the world? What if I never would have came forward? Would my life have been different? I honestly do
Mm.
not know. I'm just grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be connected to you. Whenever, our mutual connection mentioned you, I was like, absolutely. We have to sit down and have a conversation. And this will be one of many conversations. I welcome you anytime. And I just keep me updated on obviously your campaign. But is there anything else that you wanted to share with anybody? And how can they follow you on social media? How can they learn more about you? Let's kind of wrap this up a little bit and just, walk us through like how people can get involved in your campaign, how they can help you, and how they can follow you on social media and uplift your campaign.
Yeah, well, let's bridge that with your wonderful sharing there at the end. So, like you, I easily could have ended my life. There were very dark days where it was a continual thought. And you and I have both fought through those moments, just as others who are listening to us are fighting through those moments or have been through those moments too. We are the change. We are the warriors who have overcome. We are the ones putting ourselves in rooms that we don't even know how we get into. But it was as simple as choosing ourselves, choosing courage, fighting for justice, which is literally tattooed on my arm because it is what I live for every day. And I'm so glad that it's part of the title of your podcast. So thank you for inspiring people, giving people voice and opportunity. And for all those listening, you are what we're waiting for. I can't get into Congress unless you want me in Congress. None of us can do anything unless we unite in this moment against the tyranny and oppression that so many tolerate when we know it's wrong. So you can follow me at Laura Dunn for Congress. That's the handle on almost all social media, and it is the number 4, and Laura is LauraDunn, Laura Dunn for Congress. That's my website too. The only handle that's different is Twitter and or X, and that's Laura Dunn NY-12. But I welcome anyone to reach out. Please start following. Please start sharing. If you can contribute $12 for NY-12, every dollar counts. I'm not here to take millions from people for a glory campaign. I'm here to take whatever you're willing to give because I know how to maximize every single dollar towards justice, and every gift matters to me.
Absolutely. Laura, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Please take care of yourself. This world is it's different. It's different than what I grew up in. But I do have hope, and people like you continue to contribute to that hope because I see the younger voices running across. I have friends that are running for Congress. I have friends that are running for state legislature, and it is so incredibly inspiring because these are people that I've seen for like literally close to 2 decades now since I started speaking. Or well, ooh, I think I just kind of aged myself a little too far, but close to over a decade. I've been around for the last 16 years doing this work, and I've met thousands of people, and I continue to be inspired and seeing the younger generations walking out of school in protest.
Mm, very
Deeply
much.
inspiring to me. Deeply inspiring
Hmm.
because if I would have had the courage that these youth have these days, oh my God, my life would have been so incredibly different.
Hmm.
If I would have
Amen.
had educators listen, yeah, that's a whole different like topic. But other than that, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Please take care of yourself, okay?
Absolutely. And you take care of yourself too and your neighbors in Minnesota.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.